But my philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity. Divided is our nation, combating and fighting hatred. The mission, should you choose to accept it, is fighting racist. Psychology is just a space where we run in our simulations. We load you up with the tools, then we plug you into the matrix. So have a seat on the couch, now tell me your situation. Take a look in the mirror, be honest, just who you facing. Marginalized as a youth, what challenges were you faced with? Feeling you wasn't equal, told that you wouldn't make it. Your ID isn't real, got you constantly trying to fake it. Hiding behind masks in the closet till you can't take it. Getting harder to breathe, someone choking you on the pavement. Unspeakable violence attacking you cause you Asian. Accomplices we accomplish through collaboration, engaging, educating, evaluating one another, liberating the future of all our sisters and brothers, empowering, elevating all communities of color. Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity.
The Strength and Solidarity podcast is a conversational piece that invites scholars, community activists, leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs to discuss their work as accomplices in cultivating cross-racial ethnic solidarity. Hosted and produced by Pooja Mami Dana and Dr. Dana Deminari, our podcast team also includes our podcast interns, Alexis Rios and Petra Zabroga. The Strength and Solidarity podcast strives to engage, educate, evaluate, and empower communities of color one episode at a time.
Our guest today features Dr. Alfonso Mercado, an associate professor in the Department of Psychological Science and Department of Psychiatry in the School of Medicine at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, and a licensed psychologist. His research focuses on Latino mental health, including immigration, trauma, and multicultural interventions. He is the author of Cultural Competence and Psychological Assessment, Working Effectively with Latinx Populations, an Oxford University Press book. Dr. Mercado is the immediate past president of the Texas Psychological Association, and in 2023, was appointed to the American Psychological Association Advisory Coordinating Committee. In 2021, Dr. Mercado received the American Psychological Association Early Career Psychologist Achievement Award for his research, clinical, and advocacy work with recent immigrated families along the U.S.-Mexico border. He has presented his research and clinical experience to U.S. Congress, including the U.S. Congressional Hispanic Caucus, on the mental health needs of Latino children and families. Dr. Mercado is also a part of the APA Division 45, Dr. Kevin Coakley's Presidential Task Force Executive Leadership.
Hi, Dr. Alfonso. Thank you so much for being on our podcast today, Strength and Solidarity. Dr. Donna and I are so excited to have you here today.
So
Thank
lovely.
you for the invitation. I'm excited to, have this conversation with you guys.
We are so excited, especially because, you are also part of our task force, and we just can't wait to get into all the amazing work that you've done for our community on both at a local level and a national level. So we'd like to begin by asking you, what was your journey in becoming a clinical psychologist?
That's a great question. Oh man. Just to give a little bit more background, of who I am and where I'm from and all that good stuff. I was born and raised in LA. My parents are two immigrants from Guadalajara, Jalisco, in Mexico, right? So, I was born in LA, and my sister came 2 years later, and it was, it was amazing being raised in Southern California. I was part of the San Fernando Valley for lived in the San Fernando Valley, very diverse community, in Los Angeles, large, Latino population, African American population, and so many other cultures, and during that time, my father, when I was growing up in middle school, early middle school, my father had an illness, a physical illness, where he, had a tumor in his spinal cord, and they thought he was going to not be able to walk afterwards. Thankfully, he walks with a cane now, fast forward 20, 30 years later. But they said he couldn't walk, and, he was a breadwinner of our, traditional Mexican Catholic family. And, as there's multiple, gender and cultural roles that are part of, this community. And when he was, basically disabled right after his surgery, and wasn't able to provide for his family, my father experienced some mental health concerns. You could imagine, what kind of, feelings, and conditions he experienced afterwards with his one, physical illness, and two, not being able to provide for his family, right? So during that time, we would go to his doctor's appointments. I was a little kid, right? A little boy. And I remember once he was referred to a psychologist. And, growing up, we would translate for our parents everywhere we would go, because our parents only spoke Spanish. And I was there translating for my father with a psychologist.
How old were you?
I was maybe like 12 years of age, and it was very, I felt uncomfortable, because they were asking personal stuff about my father, right? So at that time, I was like, oh man, it's unfortunate. And in the LA area, there was no Spanish-speaking psychologist. Then I knew this person really wanted to help my father and the family, but there was that language barrier, right? There were multiple barriers, and then after that, college came in, and I wanted to make sure that I knew I wanted to help folks, and wanted to help different communities, and I think speaking the same language, right, and having that shared cultural background to a population that is underserved, right, was important to me, because I didn't want to, have other little kids experience what I did growing up translating, right? Personal issues about depression, suicide, you name it. I was like, oh man. But it was, rewarding to know that, I got that little glimpse, in an experience in the beginning growing up, and I wanted to know more. So I went to college, and here I am today.
Did your dad have an overall positive experience with mental health?
He did. Overall, yes. I mean, he was resilient, right? The family support system, it was amazing. But in regards to the mental health support that was offered, he only went a few times, right? He didn't really continue. But I think I'm sure he got, some, skills, that helped him for a little bit. But, fast forward, many years later, he's doing great. He has a cane, and, he uses a wheelchair still. And we still talk about this, sometimes, and he has this, proud moments of, where I'm at today, and who I see in my research and clinical work here on the border.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's very...
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go aahead. I'll go after you. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that, for immigrant parents, they sound very supportive of, what you do. And because usually at least for my experience, my parents would have, before would ask, so what is that? What is psychology?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think because we got, a little taste of that, right, growing up with my father, I must admit he wasn't really supportive, me going to college, because he wanted, because we were from a middle class to lower class, right? He wasn't working, and he wanted me to go straight to construction, what he was doing before he got sick, and help provide for the family, which I thought about it really. And then, my mom, was my ally and said, well, he's doing great. He got, these scholarships. What if he goes to college? And because of her and her support, my father was able to, also support eventually, right, my journey. But yeah, it was, just going back, I thought I would never live out of LA, right? And now that I, live on this part of the country, I love it. There's more than California, and I think I'm where I need to be.
So speaking of in that part of the country, you are currently in Texas, and we know that there's a lot going on sociopolitically in Texas. How is that going for you? I'm just really curious about that. As a psychologist, as a, you also teach as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great question, Donna, because, we live in a state, that is, geographically and politically unique, right? And I think that what has helped, given the multiple attacks on different vulnerable communities, right, in Texas, whether it's immigration or, anti-LGBT, transgender, right, affirming care, gender affirming care, and those vulnerable groups, I think what, has kept myself and other colleagues really going in the advocacy, level is making sure that making sure it's important to be, at the table where important decisions are made, right? In our field, in our profession, right? That's why it's so important to be part of your, local or state association, national, professional association, because, advocacy is part of our ethics in psychology, right? Making sure that we're communicating, the science, right, the realities, of what's going on, and making sure that we are, data driven, right? And these public statements that the last few years we've been doing a lot at the Texas Psychological Association. We started doing a lot of that, as you could imagine, during the previous administration. It was around 2018, 17, especially more when the zero tolerance policies, or they were known as the migrant protection protocols, right, which were in place back then, which did nothing but didn't do any protection, by the way, right? And some of these were enforced, and many of these policies, or most of, if not all of these policies that were in place during that time, right, is when we started, providing more of the advocacy and the awareness, and that's something that has kept us really busy ever since. Fast forward 2024, we're still doing it, right? Not only with, the immigrant population, but also, other, groups that we work with, the LGBT population. And, I think that it's our duty to, make sure that we are data driven when we are talking to our state representatives, right? Going to Capitol Hill in DC as well. Right now, it's the Practice Leadership Conference at APA in DC, and it's the first one I've missed in many, many years. The psychologists, all the state leaders are over there advocating for our profession, right? And I think that's something that's part of our duty, right, as scientists, as mental health professionals, psychologists. But in Texas, it could definitely be controversial, right? Given that political climate that you talk about, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, so given that, it is definitely controversial talking about that political climate, and also with the ways your identities intersect, engaging in social justice advocacy, what are some of the challenges you encounter that make it difficult to effectively work with, marginalized communities from these different diverse communities in Texas currently?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges are, having these, bills being sponsored by, these state representatives, that it is evident that, that no medical professionals, were consulted, right, during the writing of these bills that they want to turn into laws, right, and that's going back to our for example, our state associations, Texas Psychological Association. We have the legislative committee, we have the executive committee. Being president of the association last year, my presidential theme highlighted serving the underserved and disadvantaged populations and psychology's role in doing so here in the state. And we highlighted all the groups, that are underserved, and that continue to be attacked, right, by our governor and other state elected leaders. But I think, I think having a good team, right, and allies in the field, that can enhance our advocacy and really lobbying, not only for the guild, right, for our profession, but for these social justice issues. And one of the barriers is that not all of the TPA members, for example, are also on the same page, right?
Yeah.
So we did lose some members because we were advocating more, right, for equality, for healthcare, and and bills that do no harm, right? But we did gain more members, right, because we were doing so. We were paying attention to issues that matter, right?
So you mentioned that they were trying to pass or have passed bills where, the medical profession were not really consulted on. And so what is I'm wondering, then what's the point of all of that hard work presenting data-driven, presentation to these folks if they don't really care about that?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think, you bring up a very good point, because sometimes when we're going to, talking to these state representatives and members of Congress, and, our goal is to reach both aisles, right? And talk about not only data and science, but sometimes that is clouded with some, right? What I tend to do is share stories, right? Stories of how, these policies and bills are affecting, or will be affecting, these, different vulnerable groups. For example, the zero tolerance, when we talk about the federal government, the previous administration, the zero tolerance of family separations of 2018, that was a national crisis, right? These were policies that were in place and enforced, that were causing abuse, right?
Yeah.
Causing short-term, long-term psychological abuse and trauma, right, on these children, right, screaming for their moms. And, my students and I, we consult with the Office of Refugee Resettlement here in South Texas. We got a wind of what was happening, before that, right, before the media got to it. But I thought they were isolated incidents, so I would, contact the pro-bar and the caseworker just to make sure we were on the same page. So then we go to my students and I go to a conference in Guadalajara, Jalisco in June of 18. And, oh man, that's when, shit hit the fans, and, the media got wind of what was happening, and the university was like, hey, you might want to come back. That was when everything went everywhere. right? And, we saw so many children, at the clinical, right? Because at the same time we were doing research, we were doing clinical research with that population. But at the clinical, right, consultation with ORR, yeah, we would get a lot of referrals, hundreds of children, and it was tough. It was tough to see what was happening, and unfortunately, family separations are still happening, not to the extent of before, right? They're just being manifested differently now. And even though we have a new administration, right, you would think things would change, but being at the front lines here, doing clinical and research still, right, with this population, nothing much has changed, right? We still see, these policies in place that have just been repackaged differently, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people are still being affected by them significantly.
Do you know what happened to those children that were missing? I'm so sorry for cutting Pooja.
Yes, you know what? Let me tell you all this. During that time, I had no idea what the government was, what kind of formula they were using to separate these children. Because remember, we were doing research, right, at a humanitarian respite center where these families, are released once they're processed by immigration officials. So some families were being processed. We were seeing mom and dad, right? But a lot more were the ones being separated. So we don't know what kind of system they used to decide you are separated, you are not separated. But, there were thousands and thousands of children, that were separated, roughly about over 5,000 children. And many of them were displaced in different, local shelters, the child protective services, adoption agencies. I saw many of them through the unaccompanied minors. Remember, I consult with the Office of Refugee Resettlement down here. And so they trickled down to them, right? They didn't come as unaccompanied, right? Unaccompanied minors. They came with their mom or dad or both, but they ended up being displaced there, right, because of that family separation. And to this day, hundreds of children have yet to be reunited because they can't find, mom or their father. And consulting at ORR, that's where I would see these cases, a lot of referrals, referrals at Dr. Mercado, we think this child has autism. He's not communicating. He's not eating. He's soiling himself, They must have a, neurodevelopmental disorder. And of course, 99.9% of the time, right, that was not the case, right? They were traumatized, right? Yeah. We were seeing the immediate behaviors and symptoms of trauma, of acute trauma. And another common referral was psychosis. Dr. Mercado, we think this child has schizophrenia. I remember a 12-year-old who they thought he was mumbling to himself, so he must be psychotic, right? Responding to internal stimuli, pacing back and forth. He's not eating, not communicating. And come to find out, I do the assessment and under, cultural informed lens, that child was praying to his ancestors to be reunited. Yeah. It wasn't psychosis, right? So what do we do as psychologists? That's the question, right? We're seeing these children, and that's where trauma-informed care, is crucial. And, does the system offer it? And the answer is no, right? Their basic there are even concerns about the basic necessities, let alone trauma-informed care, right? And mental health care. And you guys have seen the news, right? The children and adults dying in detention centers. That still continues. And another policy, the Remain in Mexico where we have the refugee camps, the tent encampments, just a few steps away from U.S. soil. And that's where my students and I are currently doing research. We're interviewing families. I got my first R01 with a colleague from University of Houston, Dr. Amanda Venta, and we're going back to talk to 400 families. And this is a longitudinal research, so we're going to be following them for 4 years. Something that has never been done with this population, so we're super excited to have those resources and support. And then we're also looking at biomarkers. We're collecting blood samples too, right? So it's not only, psychological, symptoms and health, right? Sit down. We're doing, we're going under the skin now as well. So we're excited to start that in May. So we have multiple teams from all over helping us out to collect, to start the project.
Congratulations. And thank you so much, for all your social justice advocacy in support of immigrated families, like from the US-Mexico border. And, earlier you kind of expressed that when you are at like these legislative meetings with the state and the political stuff, you use stories to kind of share what's going on. I was just curious to understand, how do these people respond, or how do they react to, the information that is shared to them? And what do you generally see?
I know, Pooja, that's a really great question. And, we're talking to humans, right? So, what I use, the type of, response and, a common one is, they are concerned, obviously, even more concerned when I share these stories, right? Sorry, guys. And I'm so sorry. Is there a way to mute this?
Yeah, you just go on to mute at the bottom of the toolbar.
No, mute my messengers on this laptop.
Oh, we're not hearing anything.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not? Oh,
no.
Never mind.
No.
You're coming from my end. Perfect. So yeah. So, initially, these, many times they're staffers, right? Like the key staffers of our state representatives and members of Congress, and sometimes, it's groups, consortias, right? Or Congress, I've been, invited to speak to Congress a couple of times. And that was a little intimidating, but, I think, sharing the realities and the science, right, of what we do and the realities of the US-Mexico border through stories, not only the numbers and the statistics and the, these analysis that we did in the data, right? But, these stories I have found that, are more impactful, right? And, whether it's a one-to-one with these state representatives or a group, or a group of members of our elected officials, I do find that they are receptive, right? They hear us, right? But that's the thing. But then what?
Yeah.
Because nothing has really changed, our immigration system is broken. Many people, being abused as we speak, and many of them are dying, especially with suicidality, but yeah, it's very concerning.
So it only stops with my heart and prayers go out to you, but then they're not making an actual change.
And we see that across other issues, across the other issues too in our country, unfortunately.
Yeah.
What do you think it's getting in the way of, the message is being heard, but then what is the breakthrough of not following through, or not understanding, how much damage is causing to the whole entire community?
Let me give you another example, which I think can shed light into, of what maybe now things are changing slowly but surely in the other context of mass shootings in Texas, right?
Mm.
Texas ranks last of access to mental health care, right? And we're the biggest state,
Wow.
and one of the richest state in the country, and we rank dead last, in mental health care, in access to health care of mental health services. And TPA and other mental health, associations have been advocating for mental health funding for years, agencies, associations, you name it. But we're in legislative session this year, so all of these new bills are being introduced now that support mental health, which is great, right? And these are bipartisan support. We're like, oh, this is amazing. But what had to happen? Uvalde, right? Uvalde had to happen, where, these children and adults, right, ended up being murdered in our own backyards, right? In the little Latino community of Uvalde, Texas, west of San Antonio, and have laws change regarding firearms? No. But now at least there are some bipartisan support for mental health services in the schools and in the communities, right? But unfortunately, many people had to die, right, for this to happen.
Yeah, it's really messed up that, all around the United States, that with mass shooting and gun violence and things like that, many people are already dying. But how many more people are going to die before, an actual change happens? And it's really even sad that we're thinking and talking in terms of that slowly, like, mental health laws have happened right now in Texas because of such a bad impact that's happened. And with the parents, like, trying to migrate here, it's all like it's worse than that. Like, we just mentioned that there's so many kids who have not even been reunited with their families and don't even know where their parents are. And it's really sad that how worse can it be than what it already is.
You're right. Like, what else can happen, right? I've thought about that, Pooja, before. I'm like, what else can, like, we've seen a lot.
You would think that they would make a sweeping change after the Newtown shooting, because that one was a huge turning point, but it was still, nothing really changed after that. And we have had several mass shootings after that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you turn on the TV, there's one every week, every day sometimes.
Yeah.
It's very concerning. But yeah, no, Texas is a unique state, I love it here though, y'all, but the only concern that I have is that, right? I mean, most cities in Texas, big cities, right? They're blue dots of Texas, right? Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, you name it, even here on the border, right on our border region of the Rio Grande, but because it's so big, right? A lot of rural, areas and little towns, right? It's slowly becoming purple.
Yeah. So, Dr. Alfonso, we know you've done a lot of research on the US-Mexico border, and we'd like for you to share what are some things that you think more people should understand, about the psychological landscape of the US-Mexico border.
Yeah, that's a good question. One of my colleagues, Dr. Venta, wrote a letter to the Journal of the Clinical and Child Psychiatry Journal, and they published it, highlighting that the only and real emergency in the U.S.-Mexico border is that of mental health. And that's true because our data shines light into that, sheds light into that. You see the news sometimes, border violence, the spillover violence, they're bringing in COVID, from other countries, No, McAllen is ranked like the top third safest city in the United States, is where I live here on the border, and, these communities down here are amazing, very hardworking communities, very family. That's one of the things I love about down here is that these border communities are very family oriented. We're all big familia down here in South Texas, and when we see things, when we see injustice to these vulnerable groups, many of these communities, they say something, right? And they start, making calls, talking to their state representatives, calling officials, saying, hey, what's really happening down here, right? But I think what has helped me kind of cement my research and the love for this community is the community has embraced me, and what I do, and both clinically in the research realm, because it's hard to do research with government entities like the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, and Office of Refugee Resettlement. No one has ever really done that, right? So we get a lot of red tape. The next best thing is knowing the community, right? The community leaders, that work with that population. So I started sitting on board of directors in the community, started meeting people, and they gained my trust, and they started approving access, right? I think right now what is most concerning right now is the remain in Mexico, right? The tent encampments, over 15,000 people are living in tents. And for years, right? Over 1 million immigration asylum hearing cases have, or immigration cases hearings, different types have been seized because of COVID, because of that Title 42, right? So we have communities of tents across the river, across the border. And those folks are enduring harsh living conditions, safety, right, hunger. We have them endure very harsh weather conditions. I remember we had multiple hurricanes that wiped the entire tent encampment out, and then we had not too long ago, we had that winter storm Ori in Texas. If you guys remember, we made the national news for losing power for a couple weeks.
We were in Austin not too long ago for an AAPA EC retreat, and apparently y'all had a blizzard, or it wasn't even a blizzard. It was something for us.
The storm.
Yeah, some sort of storm. Like for us East Coasters, it's nothing. But apparently, it wiped out like more than half of the national.
Oh, I remember. That was not too long ago.
Yeah, like February first week.
Yep.
Yeah, February of last year, is when we had Ori.
Yeah, that I remember.
My goodness.
And we heard stories of children screaming they couldn't feel their fingers and their hands and their feet because of the freezing weather conditions.
Yeah. Well, I'm very, very grateful, and we are very grateful that it's a lot of hard work what you do, because you're also sitting with so much vicarious trauma that you're seeing, in the community, supervising your students, and just having so much history, also just being part of the broader community. And it takes a lot of hard work, dedication, patience, and really resilience. And we're just so happy and grateful that you and your colleagues and your students and your entire team are really doing what you're doing, because we know at the end of the day, we do need data. And if policies need to change and things on like that level, it all has to be done. So we just want to say thank you. And
yeah, I appreciate that, Pooja. And you're right. They don't really teach us this in grad school.
No.
We're kind of immersed in the trauma and doing trauma research, right? It's interesting you say that, because we're writing a paper on that, my students and I. because it's important to communicate this, because it's, we know the trauma work with our clinical work, right? But the research aspect, is slightly different. It's different, and because we're going to them, we're going to these environments, right, in field research, and yeah, it's taking a toll, but self-care is so important. That's what I start off every time during my lab meetings. What are you guys doing? Making sure that we have our support system, and checking in with someone that is a professional, mental health professional too. Is okay. We got to practice what we preach.
Yeah. I mean, even listening to your stories, it's painful, and it's almost like getting vicarious trauma.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. In when the first elections came around, during the Trump administration, during that first round of elections, I had actually gone to El Salvador for an study immersion program from my school, and it was also really hard just to see families there asking us about what is going to happen with the political situation in the US, and them not seeing their sons, daughters, etc. for many years, and also El Salvador going through that civil war, and then still healing from the trauma that happened through that. So I think when you said they don't talk about this in graduate school, they talk about trauma, but I think society as a whole and community doesn't really also understand how this trauma has passed through many generations, and it just keeps building up.
You're right. It definitely does. And part of that, if we look at it like in a resiliency lens, right? I think part of that kind of, it's an ingredient of one of the reasons of why we do what we do, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. So Dr. Donna and I were talking about this, as we were thinking of what we wanted to talk to you about. And, there's been discussions in school even about this amongst my classmates. And, in the community, we heard varied reasons for why different terms are used, such as Latino, Latina, Latine, or Latinx. And as a person outside of that community, we'd want to know what is the most culturally appropriate and inclusive approach to handle this.
That is a great question. I'm part of the now, named the National Latinx, right? Psychological Association, and in that group, it was evident that this new phraseology or terminology sat well with more of newer early career, right, graduate students. And it didn't sit so well with more of the seasoned, our mentors, in the field of psychology. So it was definitely kind of like a clash in that listserv, not only in that group, but in other groups that we were part of, right? Personal, family, professional, you name it. I think that question is a good one, and I think it's something that you may get a different answer from, right? Who you ask, and I'm all about inclusivity, right? And I think I support that Latinx movement. I even titled my papers, and my new book, highlights the Latinx, right? Term and and I think it's it is more inclusive, right? One that that many have not supported throughout history has been like the Hispanic right, terminology that many say it's more of a government imposed type of, term for cluster and labeling, and that, the Latino, Latinx, right, Latinx, movement has definitely, increased, right, in popularity and even in the literature. I was born and raised in LA, right? So, over there, we have there's more of a Chicano movement.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Mexican American Chicano movement, right? That originated in the 60s, right? As you guys know, right, the civil rights movement. And, we had the Zoot Suit riots and, and the Pachucos. And, I think the Latino psychology also started to emerge in that era. And, and that's when many different, the individuals that are our mentors now and that have kind of started these various psychological associations and ethnic minority, right, psychological associations, they all have their stories and their history, which is they're very rich. But I know the Chicano movement in psychology was definitely highlighted in many of the earlier writings. And yeah, so, the last several years, I have, definitely been supportive of that Latinx, right? And even our association did as well, and the members voted for it.
Oh, I heard stories about the whole drama behind changing the name.
It's like an identity, right? It's like, wait,
right.
you changing my identity? What's going on here?
Yeah, and I can understand why different people had different perspectives with those identities, because even, when I do intakes with my clients, I always go with to be inclusive, obviously, is also to go with how they identify themselves and the words that they use. And then, in treatment, sometimes I have clients say like, yeah, I'm Hispanic, or sometimes I have clients say I'm Latinx, or I'm just Mexican. So I generally just go with what the language my client is also using. And, like you said earlier, the space that we're in.
No, I love that. I'm glad you're doing that. And I think that's really should be the thing we should, respect, right? And that supports that cultural humility, right, and competency in our field for sure.
Yeah. So we have like 2 more questions left for you, and we just want to know what are some, also being part of our task force and out of all the work that you do in the task force, outside of the task force, national and local levels, what are some steps we need to see in the field, to see more cross-racial ethnic solidarity and be better accomplices?
That is a good question. And I love our task force because it supports something that's important to me, and I think that, most recently the different, for example, the APA, presidential elections, this kind of work has elected our new leaders in the association, being part of presidential task forces and campaigns for a couple presidents, right? And coming from different cultural backgrounds, different parts, different stories, different, sectors in psychology and research and science and, clinical work and doing all these different, different types of work. And, we're all different, but we have one thing in common, right? And I think that's what makes us stronger. And that's why, I think some of this, cross-racial solidarity work that we're doing, supporting, new leaders, right, in our profession, has been successful, the last several years at APA and TPA. Right. At TPA, we elected our first African-American president in TPA's history. Right. Yeah. We're like, there's there's a movement. It's exciting to see that, that this kind of work has led to make significant changes, right?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you also say is that we need more, cross-racial ethnic leaders in these spaces, like whether that's the political level, national level, professional organizations, and things like that. We need more of us in leadership.
Absolutely. And, I always tell this to my students and, when I give a talk and about advocacy and, it's great that, the clinical or research work that we do, and if we publish it, we're lucky if we get a citation or two, right? But if we leverage science to influence advocacy and policy efforts, right, that is where my passion is, and many of us, right, in the field, and at the same time, being strategic and putting yourself right in those important tables where the decisions are made has definitely helped, right, with this movement, and it's something that I think that we just started, and I am excited to see the future of our field.
That's great. Oh, I actually want to have a follow-up question based on Pooja's question, but I'm wondering, for those outside of the community that you're working with, Alfonso, the Latinx community and the refugee immigrant communities, how can we who are outside of those communities extend allyship, extend accomplishment, and provide support?
That is a great question. And one important answer that I want to highlight is to vote, because many of the things that I mentioned, right, are as a result, right, of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, many communities, vulnerable communities, have been presented, these unfortunate events that we're trying to recover from, if we're ever going to. But I think that is important to to continue to communicate the importance of that, right? Because that's powerful, right? Our vote, matters. It could change lives. It can save lives, right?
Yeah.
And another one is to volunteer, right? Volunteer to organizations, associations, different groups that are part of our profession that have that shared similar interest and passion, to give voices to those that don't have it, right? And we're in a position of privilege, right, as psychologists, and it's important to acknowledge that and use it, right, to help others.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, Dr. Donna, and also what you expressed, Dr. Alfonso, because you're right. As psychologists or even other professions, you do have that privilege with you, and not everyone has the privilege to vote. So
it's true.
Also using your power, right, in that regard. And so as we're wrapping up, as a student, I like to ask my podcast guests this question. And in thinking about what you would have told your younger self when you began your journey as a psychologist, what words of wisdom do you have for graduate students currently in academia, or graduate students getting into teaching or academia leadership? What would you have told your younger self?
What would I have told my younger self?
Yeah, that our generation can use those words of wisdom.
That's a good question. This is a really great group therapy process group here.
Well, we're clinicians.
Oh, man.
You can understand how the questions came up.
I know, right? Well, I did share some of my childhood history with you guys already,
You
right?
did.
Yeah.
12-year-old, right? In
Yeah.
that emergency room with my father,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Powerful question, and I think I think that, a word of wisdom that I would share, that I would whisper, would be that, follow your heart, be strong, because you have the potential to do good stuff and help
Uh,
people.
yeah. I love that. And we all could definitely use that wherever we are.
Short
And
and sweet. I love it.
yeah, it was so
If
nice.
I would have continued, I would have started bawling on y'all.
That's another episode.
Yes, part 2.
But we really would like to thank you for everything that you're doing, and also bringing in the community. And I wish I could take one of your classes and learn from you, but I'm happy that in some interaction I've got to know you more. And I hope you're attending APA, because Dr. Donna and I are coming, and if you are attending, we'd love to see you there.
Yeah,
In DC.
absolutely. Yeah, it's in DC. I think we have a couple of a couple colleagues included me in some of their symposiums. So so I may be able to go. But yeah, it would be great to catch up and maybe
Yes.
reunite the task force, right? And see whoever is there. And
Well, Kevin and Gigi will be there, so we should have lunch or something.
Yeah.
I saw them in Minnesota last year. They were part of Cynthia de las Fuentes campaign as well. So that, they were, working it. And it was great to see them as well. I know they're in Michigan now, right?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
From Austin to Michigan.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's been wonderful having you here, my friend. It's just, listening to your story, it's just so powerful. And, let me know if there is anything that I can do to help, your advocacy work, especially in the borders. Yeah, because that is just really important work.
Yeah, same. And, we are also in leadership roles in the Asian American Psychology Association. So any support that, we can give you from there as well. Like,
we're so lucky to have you guys. You guys are going to do great stuff. And, they're in good hands with you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, you guys.
Thank you. You too.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to our podcast today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. For more information about today's guests and their social media links, you can click on the description links of the episode. Pooja Mami Dana and Dr. Donna Demanarig host this podcast. Our podcast team includes our podcast interns, Alexis Rios from the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, and Petra Zadroga from Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. We also want to acknowledge our production team, David DeVito and Rachel Sheffer.
If you would like to know more about us or to watch video clips of this interview, then follow us on Instagram at APADiv45_Presidential Task Force, on Twitter at APADiv45_Coakley, or on YouTube and Facebook at Dr. Kevin Coakley, APA Division 45 Presidential Task Force.
Strength and solidarity. There's strength and solidarity.